an honor to have one of Africa's children, the acclaimed Pan-Africanist, Professor PLO Lumumba, whose vision to create a united Africa we highly support, is amongst us today to address our conference.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking you for organizing this conference and for inviting me to share my thoughts with you on a subject that is as topical as it is relevant, particularly at this time in the history of the continent. I know that the subject of our focus is Africa Arise, but there is a sense in which we must understand the history of Africa, even if time does not allow us to do so, because we live in a world where the conceptual West has inculcated in us the belief that Africa had no history until they came to the continent and started civilizing us. The Africa that I want to talk about is an Africa that existed before the advent of the Europeans and the Arabs. And one need only look at the early writings of Senegal's Cheikh Anta Diop to recognize that our continent was thriving before she was rudely interrupted. You will learn when you read Cheikh Anta Diop that the Dogon in Mali were already engaged in complex astronomy when the Europeans were living in caves, that the Monomotapa Empire, the Zulu Empire, the Benin empires were alive and well. But then our humility sometimes is our weakness. The Arabs came, we don't talk much about the Arabs as we should, but the Arabs started by invading the eastern coast of Africa, and many are the pains that they visited upon us. You do not see many Africans in the Arab world because their modus operandi was to castrate African men so that they could not have children with women in their harems. The Arabs did their thing, and then the Portuguese came along. When they came along, you know what they did. They did it along the western coast, initially starting very innocently as trade. And as you move around the coast of Africa and go to places such as Helina in Ghana or the Cape Coast, you will see the pain that was visited upon Africa through slavery. And it did not stop there. At that time, historians do actually estimate that nearly half of the population of the continent of Africa was taken away to work the land in the Caribbean and in what is now known as the United States of America. So Africa is a continent that has known slavery. And of course, conveniently, when the luster of slavery had disappeared, they pretended to abolish it. That is what the conceptualist does to us over the years. Then they introduced colonization. And the colonial project, Mwalimu Nyerere put it very well, that it has been the Lord of Africa, and he was figurative about it. Said that in Africa we say that when the elephants fight, the grass suffers. But he said, even when they make love, the grass still suffers. And he gave the example that when the European powers were meeting in Berlin in 1884 and 85 to partition Africa, they were making love to make Africa suffer. And the countries that we today call African countries, the 55 of them, are a product of that intercourse. that was engaged in by the European powers in Berlin, in Germany. And of course, whenever they have fought, when they fought their tribal wars in 1914 through to 1918 and in 1939 through to 1945, we were recruited in a war that was not ours. And Martin Luther, speaking from the words of Ralph Abernathy, said it very well, that Africans were made to laugh when there was nothing to laugh at, and that they were tickled even when they were tickled, there was no reason to laugh. There is a sense in which that is the continent that we now have, a continent which has had visited upon her pain. The only country that was not colonized, not for want of effort, is Abyssinia, which we now know as Ethiopia. But we know the attempts and the efforts that were made by the Italians. And we are therefore a people whose minds have been beaten over the years. We are people who have been made to believe that we had no history. We are people who have been abused. And that is how, therefore, I understood the words of a man that we must all read, the great Ghanaian, James Emmons Kwegyir Aggrey, otherwise referred to as Aggrey of Africa. He gave a speech several years ago in which he compared the continent of Africa to an eagle. The speech has been told and retold, but this is the version that I'll share with you. That there was once a poultry farmer, and that poultry farmer once went into the bush and caught an eagle, and that eagle, the chick of an eagle, and brought it back home, and he kept it together with his chicks, and lo and behold, as time went by, he fed them on chicken feed, but one day a naturalist came to his farm and said, I spy or spot amongst your chicken an eagle. But he said, no, it used to be an eagle, but we have fed it on chicken feed for so long that it has now lost its eaglehood and has acquired chickenhood. And the naturalist said, no, once you are an eagle, no matter how long they feed you on chicken feed, you can never, ever fail to regain your natural instinct. And he did an experiment, and the eagle flew, notwithstanding that it had lived with chicken and that it had been fed on chicken feed. I believe that our continent is that eagle. And there is a time when our continent, and the time is now, and indeed it started a little earlier, our continent is now beginning to sprout feathers. But the problem of Africa is one that is old, and her plight is one that has been stated and restated many times by those Africans in the mother continent and those who are in the diaspora. I remember so very distinctly the efforts of great Africans such as Marcus Garvey, who very early on started to realize that Africans had no space in that part of the world, and his efforts are recorded in history. I need not repeat them. He said that Africans have a duty to come back, and you remember the activities of Marcus Garvey and the efforts that he made. And it was not only Marcus Garvey at that time, Africans in the diaspora, whether they were in Jamaica or in Trinidad and Tobago or in the Bahamas, were working together to bring African people of African descent together. I remember the activities of people like George Padmore, the activities of people like W.E.B. Du Bois, and others who had a series of conferences culminating in the great conference that was held in 1945 in London, England, which became the breeding ground of the struggle for Africa to regain her independence from the chains of colonization. But it must be remembered that even when we were colonized, and this is critical, Africa did not go down without a fight. You will remember the famous Menons, otherwise called by the Europeans the Amazon women of Dahomey, now known as Benin, and how they resisted the French when they were trying to colonize them. You will remember the great exploits of Queen Zinga of the Ndongo of Matamba in Angola, who resisted the Portuguese. So Africa was always fighting. You will remember the fights of the Temne and the Mende in what is latter-day Sierra Leone. You will remember the great efforts of the people of Abyssinia or Ethiopia against the Italians. Africans were always resistant, but somehow we were subdued. And when we were subdued, there has always been this inner desire of the continent to rise again. And throughout the ages, we have seen Africans speaking about the need to unite. I remember, and you must remember jointly with me, in 1906, a young South African who was then a student at the University of Columbia delivered a speech, The Regeneration of Africa. That was the great South African Pixley Kaisaka Seme, who then in 1912 became one of the founders of the organization that led to the birth of the African National Congress in South Africa. And he himself was the president of the African National Congress between 1930 and 1937. When he gave that speech, which won him the award of the Orator of the Year, he said that Africa must unite, that Africans must have self-esteem, that it matters not where we are, whether you are in Barbuda, in Jamaica, in the United States of America, in Trinidad and Tobago, or you are in Accra, Ghana, or in Bangui, in the Central African Republic. We are all of one stock, and our safety demands that we speak with one voice. Because he was able to recognize that throughout history, the modus operandi of the colonizer and the neo-colonizer has always been to divide us. That is why when they sat in Berlin in 1884, they parceled out our continent into a French sphere of influence, and they called it Francophone. They carved another bit of it to the British, and they called it the Anglophone. They carved another to the Portuguese and called it the Lusophone. And of course, one can say that in the Sudan, there was also an Arabophone. And of course, the Belgians were there, and the Germans were there until what they called the World War. And of course, we know that the Italians were there. So there was nobody who was not present of the European power. The Spaniards were there. And we don't talk about it as loudly as we ought to. Pain was visited upon Africa. King Leopold of the Belgians killed nearly 15 million Congolese, twice the number that Adolf Hitler killed among the Jews. But we don't talk about it. Until very recently, the pernicious regime of apartheid South Africa was alive and well. In South Africa, the Boers, and in what they named Rhodesia, and in Namibia. That is the Africa that I want to talk about. It is an Africa that has known pain and that continues to know pain, but it is an Africa that has refused to go down. And it's an Africa that will never go down. You know, in 1976, an African American, Alex Haley, whom you know, wrote the story Roots. And he talked about a character called Kunta Kinte from Jufure village in what is now known as the Gambia. How he was taken away, Kunta Kinte, and how he was beaten, and how he was taken to the farmlands in the United States of America, and how he was told that he must lose out, he must change his name, and how he was beaten and he answered to the name Toby. But I remember so very distinctly, and the Liver Barton played the younger Kunta Kinte and John Amos, the older Kunta Kinte, and ultimately he said, although they call me Toby, my name is Kunta Kinte. I'm now telling us that for Africa to rise, you must find a Kunta Kinte in you. The Kunta Kinte must be seen as the residual being and self-esteem that never dies. And that is what I now begin to see when I walk across Africa, when I attend conferences such as these. I can now see Kunta Kinteism beginning to emerge and people beginning to embrace something that is different, because throughout the ages, the continent of Africa has always been punished in very painful ways. We have been punished. Our resources have been looted. When I watched the dresses that are on display, and I learned that the dress of King Trewodro's wife now resides at a museum in the United Kingdom. What do you call that in English? Theft. If you go to the museums of Europe, whether it is Le Louvre or the Guggenheim museums, they are populated with things that were stolen by the Europeans, but they don't call it theft. When they take it, they don't call it theft, but they are just thieves who have stolen our art. And they did not only steal our art, they have stolen many things. They have stolen and continue to steal our resources. In the words of Frantz Fanon, they have even stolen our very being. They have thingified us. They have turned us into things. They colonized us. But we woke up when on the 6th day of March, 1957, a country then known as Gold Coast regained our independence under the leadership of the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. He delivered a speech, and the Osagyefo said that the independence of Ghana means nothing if the other African countries are not independent. A year later, he organized a conference in Accra, Ghana in 1958 and said, we must unite as Africans because the colonizer is going to recolonize us again through subtle and subterranean means. They listened to him not. A year later, 2 years later, in Casablanca, Morocco in 1961, he repeated the same thing, let us unite for our own sake. But the neo-colonizer had started disorganizing Africa so that when on the 23rd through to the 25th days of May 1963, the Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia hosted the first African Organization of African Unity meeting in Addis Ababa. Kwame Nkrumah said, we must do two things today. We must come out of here united. We must have one army, one currency, and one nation, otherwise we will be punished. He was supported in that crusade by Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. He was supported by Ahmed Ben Bella of Algeria, and he was supported by Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. But they listened to him not. And we ended up with a weak organization called the Organization of African Unity. That is the Africa that we are talking about, but it's an Africa that has always tried to regain her dignity. You will remember the many efforts to regain our dignity in the arts. In 1966 in Dakar, Senegal, through the efforts of the then president of Senegal, Leopold Sedar Senghor, and Aimé Césaire, inspired by W.E.B. Du Bois, there was the first festival of arts and culture in Dakar, Senegal. And African countries congregated. It did not end there. In 1977, there was another festival of arts and culture in Lagos, Nigeria, at the Abubakar Tafawa Balewa Square. Africa trying to discover herself in the arts. But that Africa has always known pain, because whenever she tries to unite, the erstwhile colonial powers try to destabilize her. So that even when we regained our independence, no sooner had we regained our independence than the forces and the machinations of the conceptual West were already kicked in. So that for the man for whom I am named, Patrice Emery Lumumba, Congo regains our independence in 1961, and within 9 months they have killed him. In Togo, the same thing. Within a few years, they have killed Sylvanus Olympio. In Mali, they have kicked out Modibo Keita. In Ghana, they have kicked out the Osagie Kwame Nkrumah. In Nigeria, they have kicked out Abubakar Tafawa Balewa and Nnamdi Azikiwe. And it goes on and on. Much later, we see how they punish leaders. They killed Thomas Sankara, they killed Samora Moises Machel, they killed many leaders. That is the continent that we are talking about. But she's a continent that never says die. And while the history is important, and while the lamentations are necessary, we cannot forever move forward if we use the reverse mirror as our only point of reference. The history is only a bedrock to demonstrate to us that we have a history, to demonstrate to us that we have a past, a rich past, to demonstrate to us that we are the mother continent, to demonstrate to us that our unity in diversity, to demonstrate to us and to remind us that we have been miseducated and that we've got to re-educate ourselves, to remind us that sometimes religion has been used adversely against us, to remind us that our minds have been brainwashed and that we've got to say with Fela Anikula Pokuti, teacher, don't teach me nonsense. To say with Carter G. Woodson that the Negro or the black man has been miseducated for too long, and that going forward, we must re-educate ourselves. To remind ourselves that democracy is not Coca-Cola, which is manufactured out of Atlanta, Georgia, and is imposed on Africa as a one-size-fits-all. To remind the world that Hollywood is not what creates the arts, that we also have Bongowood and Nollywood and Riverwood. To remind them that when we say that black is beauty, we are not simply being romantic about it, we mean it. To remind them that our diversity is our greatness and that we are the fairest race on earth. We accommodate everybody, but we are abused by everybody. And that is why, as I speak to you today, I have no doubt in my mind that Africa is rising, not will rise, she is rising. You only need to walk across the continent of Africa, and we must tell our story. Our weakness is that we allow our story to be told by CNN. And CNN has a jaundiced view. She only sees the wrong things about Africa. The BBC has a jaundiced view. She only sees an Africa that has wars. They don't talk about wars in their backyard. Radio France International has a jaundiced view. Al Jazeera has a jaundiced view. We must tell our story because, as the saying goes, as long as the hunters tell the story, it is only the exploit of the hunters that will be made known to the world and not the bravery of the lion. We are the lion, they are the hunters. So this Africa, our Africa, what must we do about her going forward? We must do a number of things. We must begin to regain our self-esteem. We must tell them that we are not children of a lesser God. And we must not only tell them, we must act so as to demonstrate to them. It is the great Ghanaian or great Nigerian poet, Wole Soyinka, who said, a tiger does not shout about his tigritude. You walk the path of a tiger and you see the skeleton of an antelope and you know that some tigritude has been emanated there. So we must speak, but our actions must speak even louder. Unity is one of the things that we must talk about. But when we talk about unity, we are not being naive. We know that we are diverse. We ought to be united about the things that will improve the continent of Africa. And those things are already happening. Africa Agenda 2063 tells us that in the next 50 years, we will be perhaps the biggest economy in the world if we work at it. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area is going to bring down and make nonsense of the artificial boundaries created in Berlin in 1884. The African skies will be opened as was agreed in Yamoussoukro in Côte d'Ivoire. We are going to ensure that our women are at the center of our activities as was agreed in Maputo and Malabo. We are going to ensure that our health sectors are well funded as was agreed in Abuja. We are going to ensure that we have a single African passport as was agreed in Kigali in Rwanda. We are going to ensure that we trade more with each other as was agreed in Lagos in Nigeria. And we are going to agree that our men and women in the diaspora, wherever they are in the Caribbean, and there are over 300 million of them, are going to pull together with us so that our GDP combined of all African countries, which is only $3 trillion in the next 50 years, there is no reason why it should not be $20 trillion. It can be done. The Chinese have done it in our lifetime. They don't have the resources that we have, both natural and human. They don't. Look at a country like Nigeria, Ghana, and many others, Ethiopia. I need not count any of them. We are now getting into the arena of power generation. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and I'm unhappy that there is a conflict about it between Egypt and Ethiopia and the Sudan, but I believe it will be resolved. Look at the power they are going to generate, 10,000 megawatts. Look at the Grand Inga Dam in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Africa will rise. Africa will rise so that we'll be able to make our own clothes. For a long time, under schemes such as AGOA, America makes our women to make jeans for them. Then they are brought to the United States of America. Then they are worn by men and women in the United States of America. And when they are tired of them, they send us what they have thrown as second-hand clothing. In future, we are not going to accept that. The textile factories that were dead in Kaduna are going to rise. We are going to wear shoes that are made in Ethiopia, not in Italy or in France. We are going to wear perfume, not made by Christian Dior or Yves Saint Laurent, but by our African women and African men. It can be done. We are not going to have Kellogg's on our breakfast tables. We are going to have something else. We are not going to export cocoa to Switzerland so that we buy Nestle. No, we are going to make it, and already it's being done in Togo and in Ghana. That Africa is rising. We are going to harness solar power. We are going to make our own cars. We are going to make our own mobile. And in the art, we are not going to watch Hollywood. Already Nollywood is generating movies. Riverwood is generating movies. Bongowood is generating movies. We are not going to talk about Harvard as the mecca of intellectual output. No. The University of Ahmadu Bello can do it. The University of Addis Ababa can do it. Sheikh Anta Diop University can do it. And many other universities. We are not going to wait for Roche to make medicine for us, or Johnson to make medicine for us, or Johns Hopkins University, or Oxford, or any one of them to make vaccines, which we do not know their content, to be used here in Africa. We are going to do it, and it's already happening. The Malagasy Institute of Applied Science is already doing it. Africa is going to rise, and indeed it is rising. And I must conclude, because conclude I must. When I now walk across Africa, I know that there are wars in Africa, there are conflicts in Africa, but I see good things. When I traveled to Kigali in Rwanda, and I know that 25 years ago our obituary was written, I know that it can be done. When I travel to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia and I see the expansion that is going there, despite a few political problems, I know that it can be done. When I see the railway from Addis Ababa to Djibouti, I know that it can be done. When I see the Grand Renaissance Dam, I know that it can be done. When I go to Tanzania and I see the infrastructure that is coming along, I know it can be done. When I go to Namibia and Botswana and I now see that they can cut their own diamond and they don't take it to Antwerp, I know that it can be done. When I go to Ghana and I see factories coming up in every district and I can see that they are doing their own things, I know that it can be done. When I see that the Ugandans have made a solar-powered bus, I know that it can be done. It will be done. And you who are out there in the diaspora, courtesy of COVID, we are now interacting with you a little more intimately. In a manner of speaking, the heavy knees of the Caucasians have been on our necks for too long. Like George Floyd, we have not been breathing for too long, but we are beginning to breathe. You know, there is a sense in which this continent, to use this biblical analogy, the David in us must now rise to defeat the Goliath in them. And I believe that history is on our side. Africa is rising. And it is you and me who must play our part. The late Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere of Tanzania used to say, it can be done. Play your part. It can be done. Play your part. God bless you.
Thank you for inspiring us, Professor Lumumba.